In the sleepy village of Netherby-on-Stream, where the River Wye whispers secrets, a ghostly flame flickers by the water's edge, luring a man to his death. When Tom Rudd is found murdered, his blood staining the moonlit stream, Miss Jane Marple arrives to unravel a web of lies, love, and betrayal. A dented cigarette case, a charred letter, and a circle of suspects hide a truth that only her sharp eyes can uncover. Will she expose the killer before the flame's secret fades forever? Chapter 1: The Whisper of the Streaming. The quiet village of Netherby-on-Stream, where the willows dipped their mournful branches into the glassy waters of the River Wye. Life moved with the gentle rhythm of seasons. The village, nestled in a fold of the Cotswolds, was a place of thatched cottages, winding lanes, and secrets that clung to the air like morning mist. It was late August 1929, and the summer sun casts long shadows over the meadows where the villagers prepared for the annual harvest supper. Yet, beneath the surface of this pastoral idyll, a current of unease stirred, as subtle and persistent as the ripple of the stream itself. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a lavender tweed coat, sat by the window of her niece's cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly. She had come to Netherby at the invitation of her niece, Florence Hart, who had married a local solicitor and settled here 3 years prior. Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes, framed by spectacles, surveyed the village green beyond the lace curtains. She noted the comings and goings of the villagers with an interest that was both benign and piercing, as though each gesture or glance might reveal a hidden truth. "It is a charming place, Florence," Miss Marple remarked, her voice soft but clear. "But I fancy there is more to Netherby than meets the eye. Villages, you know, are like people. They have their secrets." Florence, a plump woman with a nervous laugh, set a tray of tea things on the table. "Oh, Aunt Jane, you do say the oddest things. Netherby is as peaceful as can be. Why, we've not had so much as a stolen bicycle in years." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles pausing. "Peaceful, yes, but peace can be deceptive, my dear, like a still pond that hides a strong current beneath." Florence shook her head, accustomed to her aunt's cryptic observations. She poured the tea and began to chatter about the harvest supper, which was to be held that evening at Willowbank Hall, the grand estate of Sir Henry Ashford. The hall, a Georgian pile surrounded by ancient yews, was the heart of Netherby's social life, and Sir Henry, a widower of 60, with a reputation for generosity, was its benevolent lord. The supper promised to be a grand affair, with the entire village invited to dine, dance, and celebrate the bounty of the season. As Florence spoke, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the green, where a group of villagers was erecting a marquee. She noted the key figures with the precision of a naturalist cataloging specimens. There was Sir Henry himself, tall and silver-haired, directing the placement of tables with a military air. Beside him stood his daughter, Clara Ashford, a striking young woman of 25, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she laughed with a man Miss Marple recognized as Dr. Philip Grayson, the village physician. Dr. Grayson, in his early 30s, had a boyish charm that belied a certain intensity in his dark eyes. Further off, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, the vicar's wife, was arranging flowers with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Her husband, the Reverend Thomas Carver, hovered nearby, his thin frame stooped as he offered timid suggestions. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly as she observed Mrs. Carver's sharp glance toward Clara Ashford, a glance that held perhaps a hint of disapproval. Then there was Mr. Leonard Finch, the local apothecary, a wiry man with a pinched face and restless hands. He was speaking animatedly to Miss Dorothy Blake, a spinster of indeterminate age who ran the village post office. Miss Blake's prim demeanor contrasted with the flush in her cheeks, as though Mr. Finch's words had stirred some emotion she preferred to conceal. And finally, lurking near the edge of the green, was Tom Rudd, the groundskeeper of Willowbank Hall, a burly man with a sullen expression. He leaned against a tree, watching the preparations with an air of detachment. Miss Marple noted the way his eyes followed Clara Ashford, and the way Clara, in turn, avoided his gaze. "There is a great deal of feeling in this village," Miss Marple murmured, almost to herself. "A great deal of feeling, indeed." Florence laughed again, but there was a nervous edge to it. "You make it sound so ominous, Aunt Jane. It's just the harvest supper. Everyone's excited, that's all." "Excitement," said Miss Marple, resuming her knitting, "can be a dangerous thing." The afternoon passed in a haze of golden light, and by evening the village had transformed. Lanterns hung from the trees around Willowbank Hall, casting a warm glow over the marquee. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and the faint tank of cider. The villagers, dressed in their Sunday best, mingled with an ease that belied the undercurrents Miss Marple had sensed. She sat at a table near the edge of the marquee, her shawl draped over her shoulders, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. Sir Henry, resplendent in a tailored suit, gave a brief speech welcoming the village. His voice was warm, but Miss Marple detected a strain in it, as though he carried a private burden. Clara, seated beside him, smiled graciously, but her eyes darted toward Dr. Grayson, who was engaged in conversation with Mrs. Carver, the vicar's wife. Miss Marple noted, was unusually animated, her hands fluttering as she spoke. As the meal progressed, the band struck up a lively tune, and couples took to the dance floor. Miss Marple watched Clara dance with Dr. Grayson, their movements graceful, but marked by a certain tension. She saw Tom Rudd, now in a clean shirt but still brooding, standing by the stream that ran behind the hall. The water, black and gleaming under the moonlight, seemed to draw his attention, and Miss Marple wondered what thoughts occupied his mind. It was then that she noticed something curious. A faint, flickering light, like a ghostly flame, appeared near the stream's edge, just beyond the EUs. It danced for a moment, then vanished. Miss Marple's knitting needles stilled. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to have noticed. The villagers were too absorbed in their merriment, and the band's music drowned out any sound the flame might have made. "Curious," she murmured, "most curious." The evening wore on, and the supper reached its peak. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but Miss Marple's attention remained fixed on the stream. She had seen that flame or something like it before in her long years of observing the world. It was not a natural light, she was certain, but what it signified, she could not yet say. As the clock in the hall struck 10, a piercing scream cut through the music. The band faltered, and the dancers froze. All eyes turned toward the stream, where Mrs. Carver stood, her face ashen, pointing at the water. "There!" she cried. "It's him! He's dead!" Miss Marple rose, her movements calm but deliberate. She made her way to the stream, where a crowd was already gathering. There, half submerged in the shallow water, lay the body of Tom Rudd, his face pale and his eyes staring blankly at the sky. A thin trickle of blood ran from a wound at his temple. Mingling with the dark water, Dr. Grayson pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside the body. "He's gone," he said quietly, his voice steady but grim. "Dead for at least an hour, I'd say." Miss Marple stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes taking in every detail. The position of the body, the blood, the muddy bank, and the faint, acrid smell that lingered in the air. She noted the expressions of the villagers: shock, fear, and, in some cases, something else entirely. "Well," she said softly, to no one in particular, "it seems Nether-beyond-stream has its secrets, after all." Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The night air grew chill as the villagers of Nether-beyond-stream stood frozen by the stream, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns. Tom Rudd's body lay half submerged, the dark water lapping it. His lifeless form, the blood from his temple, now a faint smear against the moonlit stones. The scream from Mrs. Evelyn Carver still seemed to echo, though she had fallen silent, her hands clasped tightly to her chest, as her husband, the Reverend Thomas Carver, murmured ineffectual comforts. Miss Jane Marple, standing at the edge of the crowd, observed the scene with her usual quiet intensity, her sharp eyes darting from face to face, noting every quiver of emotion, every sidelong glance. Sir Henry Ashford took charge with the authority of a man accustomed to command. "Everyone, step back, please," he called, his voice firm but strained. "We mustn't disturb the scene. Dr. Grayson, can you ensure no one touches the body until the police arrive?" Dr. Philip Grayson, still kneeling beside Tom Rudd, nodded curtly. "Of course, Sir Henry, I'll stay here." His hands, steady as he examined the wound, betrayed no tremor. But Miss Marple noted a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of something grief, perhaps, or fear in his dark eyes. Clara Ashford, her auburn hair now slightly disheveled, stood close to her father, her face pale. "Who could have done this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Marple, standing nearby, caught the words, and the way Clara's gaze lingered on Dr. Grayson, as though seeking reassurance. The doctor, however, did not look up. The crowd murmured, a low hum of shock and speculation. Miss Dorothy Blake, the postmistress, clutched her shawl and muttered to Mr. Leonard Finch, "The apothecary, it's dreadful, simply dreadful." Tom was a rough sort, but to end like this. Finch's pinched face twitched, and he replied, in a low voice, rough or not, he had enemies. You saw how he looked at people. Miss Marple's knitting, tucked into her bag, remained untouched, for her hands were now occupied with the task of observation. She noted the way Finch's fingers fidgeted as though itching to grasp something or to hide it. She saw, too, the way Mrs. Carver's eyes darted toward the stream, not at the body, but at the bank, where the mud was churned and trampled. And she remembered the ghostly flame, that strange flicker she had seen just before the scream. It was no natural phenomenon, she was certain, but its purpose eluded her for. Now Florence Hart, Miss Marple's niece, hurried to her aunt's side, her face flushed with agitation. "Aunt Jane, this is awful. Poor Tom. Who would do such a thing? And at the harvest supper, of all places." Miss Marple patted her niece's arm gently. "Calm yourself, Florence. We must keep our wits about us. A crime has been committed, and it is, in moments like these, that one sees most clearly if one knows where to look. The police arrived within the hour, led by Inspector Crawley, a stocky man with a bristling mustache and a no-nonsense air. He was accompanied by a young constable who began cordoning off the area with rope. Inspector Crawley surveyed the scene, his eyes narrowing as he took in the body, the crowd, and the dark, silent stream. "Sir Henry," he said, approaching the squire, "I'll need a word with everyone present. No one is to leave until we've taken statements. Dr. Grayson, your preliminary findings, if you please." Dr. Grayson rose, brushing mud from his trousers. Tom Rudd, aged about 40, groundskeeper at Willowbank Hall, dead approximately an hour, perhaps a bit more. Cause of death appears to be a blow to the head here, at the right temple. The wound is deep, likely made by a heavy, blunt object. No sign of drowning. He was dead before he hit the water. Inspector Crawley nodded, scribbling in his notebook. Time of death. Then between 9 and 10 o'clock, would you say? Closer to 9:30, I'd estimate, Dr. Grayson replied. The body's cooled, but not significantly. Rigor hasn't set in yet. Miss Marple, standing just within earshot, tilted her head slightly. 9:30, she thought. The scream had come at 10, and the ghostly flame had appeared shortly before. The timeline was tight, and the discrepancy intrigued her. She glanced at the crowd, noting who stood where and with whom. Sir Henry was speaking quietly to Clara, his hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Carver was now composed, though her eyes were red-rimmed. Mr. Finch and Miss Blake stood apart, their conversation hushed but animated, and the Reverend Carver, hovering near his wife, seemed more anxious than mournful. Inspector Crawley began taking statements, calling villagers one by one to a small table set up near the marquee. Miss Marple watched as each gave their account, her mind cataloguing their words and mannerisms. Sir Henry stated he had been circulating among the guests, ensuring everyone was enjoying themselves, and had last seen Tom Rudd near the stream at around 9 o'clock, looking surly, as usual. Clara claimed she had been dancing or chatting with guests all evening, a fact corroborated by several villagers, though Miss Della noted her hesitation when asked about her movements between 9 and 9:30. Dr. Grayson said he had been mingling, then assisting with a minor injury, a child who had scraped his knee around 9:15. Mrs. Carver, her voice sharp, declared she had been arranging flowers and speaking with guests until she took a walk by the stream at 10. When she discovered the body, her husband confirmed this, though his stammering delivery suggested uncertainty. Mr. Finch said he had been about, talking with Miss Blake and others, and Miss Blake herself offered a vague account of circulating among the tables. Miss Marple, when her turn came, gave a simple statement. She had been seated near the marquee, observing the festivities, and had seen nothing unusual until the scream. She did not mention the ghostly flame knot yet. That detail, she felt, was hers to ponder like a single dropped stitch in a complex pattern. As the interviews concluded, Inspector Crawley addressed the crowd. "We'll need to search the area thoroughly tomorrow, and I'll be speaking to each of you again. For now, return to your homes. No one is to discuss this matter outside the village." The villagers dispersed, their chatter subdued. Miss Marple, walking slowly back to Florence's cottage, felt the weight of the night's events settle upon her. Florence, clinging to her arm, whispered, "Do you think it was an accident, Aunt Jane, or murder?" "Murder, my dear Miss Marple. said quietly. A blow like that does not come by chance. And the stream, you see, is a convenient place to hide one's traces or so the killer thought. Back at the cottage, Florence made tea, her hands trembling. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape in her lap. She considered Tom Rudd a man of few words, rough in manner, but not without significance, in Netherby. He had been the groundskeeper for years, privy to the comings and goings of Willowbank Hall. What had he seen or heard that made him dangerous? And what of that ghostly flame by the stream? It suggested intent, perhaps a signal or a lure. Miss Marple's mind turned over the possibilities, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. "Florence," she said suddenly, "tell me about Tom Rudd. Did he have enemies?" Florence hesitated, then leaned forward. "He wasn't well liked, Aunt Jane. He was, coarse, always arguing with people, Sir Henry, Dr. Grayson, even Mrs. Carver. And there were rumors he knew things about the Ashfords, things he shouldn't have. But I don't know details." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Knowledge, my dear, can be a dangerous thing, especially in a village like Netherby." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts wove together the night's events. A body by the stream, a mysterious light, a circle of suspects, each with secrets. The pattern was forming, and she would unravel it, one thread at a time. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Curiosity. The morning after Tom Rudd's death dawned gray and heavy. The sky over Netherby-on-Stream cloaked in clouds that mirrored the village's somber mood. The air carried the damp scent of the River Wye, and the willows along its banks seemed to droop with a mournful air. Miss Jane Marple sat at the breakfast table in her niece's cottage, her hands folded neatly around a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the window. The village green, so lively the previous evening, was now deserted, save for a lone constable patrolling near the stream, where a makeshift barrier of ropes marked the scene of the crime. Florence's heart bustled about, her nerves evident in the clatter of dishes. "It's dreadful, Aunt Jane," she said, setting a plate of toast before her aunt. "The whole village is talking. They say Tom was struck down in cold blood. Inspector Crawley was at Willowbank Hall this morning, questioning Sir Henry and Clara. Do you think they'll find the killer soon?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained sharp. "The police are diligent, Florence, but diligence is not always enough. A crime like this requires understanding of people, their motives, their little habits. The truth lies in the details, my dear, and details are often overlooked by those in a hurry." Florence frowned, puzzled, but Miss Marple did not elaborate. Her mind was already at work, sifting through the events of the previous night. The ghostly flame by the stream lingered in her thoughts, a peculiar detail that refused to fit neatly into the puzzle. She had seen such a light once before, years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a poacher used a chemical flare to signal his accomplice. Could this flame have served a similar purpose, a signal, a lure, or perhaps a distraction? And if so, for whom was it intended? Her reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Florence opened it to reveal Miss Dorothy Blake, the postmistress, her thin face pale and her hands clutching a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart," she said, her voice tight. "I thought Miss Marple might be here. I wanted to speak with her, if I may." "Of course, Miss Blake," Miss Marple said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Would you care for tea?" Miss Blake shook her head, her fingers twisting the parcel string. No, thank you. I've come about last night. It's dreadful, isn't it? Tom Rudd, dead by the stream. I couldn't sleep thinking of it. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her gaze was keen. It is a tragedy indeed. You knew Mr. Rudd, I presume? Miss Blake hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. Not well, no. He came to the post office sometimes to send letters or collect parcels. He was abrupt, not a man to make friends easily. But he wasn't all bad, you know. He had a way with the gardens at Willowbank Hall. The roses were his pride. Roses, Miss Marple murmured, her knitting needles clicking softly as she resumed her work. A man who tends roses must have some patience, some care. Did he ever speak of his troubles, or of anyone who might wish him harm? Miss Blake's hands stilled. Not directly, but he did say something odd a few weeks ago. He mentioned he'd seen something he shouldn't have, up at the hall. He wouldn't say what, only that it changed things. I thought he was just being dramatic. But now, her voice trailed off, and she glanced nervously at the window. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Miss Blake. That is most interesting. And this parcel something urgent, I take it. Miss Blake started, as though she'd forgotten the parcel in her hands. Oh, it's for Sir Henry. A delivery from London. Arrived this morning. I thought I'd drop it off on my way to the post office. But, well, I wanted to see you first. Very kind of you, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. You must be very busy, managing the post office. You see so much of the village's comings and goings. Miss Blake's flush deepened. I suppose so. People don't notice the postmistress, but I notice them. She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. I must be going. Thank you, Miss Marple. As the door closed behind her, Florence turned to her aunt. What an odd visit. Why do you think she came, Aunt Jane? Surely not just to gossip about Tom Rudd. Miss Marple's needles paused. Miss Blake is frightened, Florence. She knows something, or thinks she does, and it weighs on her. People often seek me out when they're troubled. They don't always say what they mean, but their words betray them. The morning progressed, and Miss Marple decided to take a walk to Willowbank Hall. She wished to see the scene of the crime in daylight, to examine the stream and its surroundings. Florence, eager to escape the confines of the cottage, accompanied her, chattering nervously about the village's reaction to the murder. The hall was a handsome structure, its stone facade softened by ivy and flanked by the ancient yews that gave it an air of timeless dignity. The stream ran behind the property, its banks lush with grass and dotted with wildflowers. The police barrier remained, but the constable had moved to the front of the hall, leaving the stream unattended. Miss Marple approached the spot where Tom Rudd's body had been found, her eyes scanning the ground. The mud on the bank was still, churned, marked by footprints of varying sizes, some deep, some shallow, likely from the crowd that had gathered the previous night. But one set caught her attention, a pair of small, neat prints pressed deeply into the mud near a cluster of reeds. They were not the heavy boots of a groundskeeper or the clumsy steps of a curious onlooker. They suggested purpose, perhaps stealth. Look, Florence, Miss Marple said, pointing. These prints are fresh, and they stop just here, where the reeds are thick. Someone stood here, watching or waiting. Florence shivered. You don't think the murderer? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice calm. Or perhaps someone who saw more than they've admitted. As they stood by the stream, Sir Henry Ashford emerged from the hall, his face drawn. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly. "Mrs. Hart, a grim morning, isn't it? I trust you're bearing up." "As well as can be expected," Miss Marple replied. "A terrible business, Sir Henry. I was just admiring your grounds. The stream is quite lovely, though it has taken on a darker aspect now." Sir Henry's jaw tightened. Indeed, Tom was a good worker, despite his rough ways. "I can't imagine who would do this. The police are poking about, asking questions, but I fear they're grasping at straws." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "The police have their methods, Sir Henry. But tell me, did Tom ever speak of any disagreements? With you, perhaps, or others, at the hall?" Sir Henry hesitated, his hand brushing the lapel of his coat. He was a difficult man at times. He and Dr. Grayson had words now and then, something about the gardens, I believe. And he was impertinent with Clara once or twice, which I didn't care for. But nothing serious enough to lead to this. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course. And the harvest supper, such a splendid event. You must have been very busy last night, overseeing it all." "I was," Sir Henry said, a touch too quickly. "Greeting guests, ensuring the food was served, that sort of thing. I hardly had a moment to myself until after 10. "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her tone unchanged. "It must be a great responsibility, hosting the village. And your daughter, Miss Clara, she seemed much admired last night." Sir Henry's face softened. "Clara is a treasure. She's taken on so much since her mother passed. But this business has shaken her badly." As Sir Henry excused himself, Miss Marple turned back to the stream, her mind turning over his words. His alibi was vague, and his mention of Tom's impertinence with Clara suggested a tension worth exploring. She recalled Clara's nervous glance at Dr. Grayson the previous night, and the doctor's own guarded demeanor. And then there was Miss Blake's cryptic remark about Tom seeing something he shouldn't have. "Florence," Miss Marple said, "I think we shall pay a visit to the vicarage this afternoon." Mrs. Carver's scream was the first to alert us. "To the body. I should like to know more about her walk by the stream." Florence looked dubious. "Mrs. Carver, she's so proper, Aunt Jane. Do you really think she knows anything?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "My dear, the most proper people often know the most. They simply choose not to say it." As they walked back to the cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the ghostly flame. It was a clue, she was certain, but its meaning remained elusive. She would need to observe more closely, to listen to the village's whispers, and to unravel the threads of motive and opportunity that bound this small, secretive community. Chapter 4. The vicarage. Valtha. Afternoon sun struggled to pierce the heavy clouds over Netherby-on-Stream, casting a muted light over the village as Miss Jane Marple and her niece, Florence Hart, made their way to the vicarage. The path wound past the church, its ancient stone tower standing sentinel over the graves, and along a lane bordered by hedgerows. Miss Marple walked with a measured step, her lavender coat neatly buttoned, her eyes scanning the surroundings with an air of quiet curiosity. Florence, clutching her handbag, seemed less composed, her glances darting toward the stream that ran parallel to their route. "Aunt Jane, do you really think Mrs. Carver knows something?" Florence asked, her voice low. "She's always so upright. I can't imagine her mixed up in anything as dreadful as murder. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. They guard their secrets with such care, you see, that a single slip can reveal a great deal. Mrs. Carver's scream last night was not merely shock, I think. There was something else, fear, perhaps, or recognition. The vicarage was a modest, ivy-clad house beside the church, its garden meticulously tended with roses that rivaled those of Willowbank Hall. Miss Marple noted the precision of the flower beds, each bloom perfectly placed, and thought of Mrs. Evelyn Carver's obsessive arrangement of flowers at the harvest supper. Such orderliness, she reflected, often masked a restless mind. Mrs. Carver herself opened the door, her face composed but pale, her dark eyes wary. She wore a high-necked dress, its gray fabric as severe as her expression. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart," she said, her voice crisp. "How kind of you to call. Please, come in." The sitting room was a study in propriety. Polished furniture, a vase of fresh lilies, and a Bible open on a side table. The Reverend Thomas Carver rose from an armchair, his thin frame stooping slightly as he greeted them. "A terrible business, this," he murmured, his hands clasped nervously. "Poor Tom Rudd. We've been praying for his soul." "Very proper," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with her knitting bag on her lap. "A shocking event, to be sure. I understand, Mrs. Carver, that you were the first to discover the body. It must have been most distressing." Mrs. Carver's hands tightened in her lap, though her face remained impassive. "It was. I had stepped out for a breath of air. The marquee was so warm, you knowned. I walked toward the stream. I saw something in the water, and when I looked closer, there he was. I couldn't help but scream." "Quite natural," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. Mrs. Carver hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Yes, alone. Thomas was speaking with some parishioners, and I needed a moment's quiet." The Reverend Carver nodded eagerly. "I didn't see Evelyn until she screamed." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "And you, Mrs. Carver, did you notice anything unusual by the stream?" "No, I saw nothing like that. Just Tom in the water. It was dark, and the lanterns didn't reach that far." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course. And yet, it's curious, isn't it? You must have had a reason to go there." Mrs. Carver's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "I told you I wanted air. The supper was crowded, and I find such gatherings tiring." "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "You were arranging flowers earlier, I noticed. He was near the stream earlier, I believe." Mrs. Carver's hands twitched. "I saw him briefly, near the EUs. He was loitering, as he often did." The Reverend Carver interjected, his voice anxious. "Tom was a troubled soul, Miss Marple. I tried to speak with him, to offer guidance, but he was not receptive. He had a temper, you know, and he'd been at odds with several people." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing. "Who, for instance?" The vicar hesitated, glancing at his wife. "Well, Dr. Grayson, for one. They argued about the Hall's gardens, something about pruning, I think, and Tom was rude to Clara Ashford once or twice. Sir Henry was quite upset about it." Mrs. Carver's expression tightened, but she said nothing. Miss Marple noted the glance she exchanged with her husband, a glance that held, perhaps, a warning. The room grew quiet, save for the ticking of a clock and the faint patter of rain beginning outside. Tom wasn't the friendliest man, but who would want to kill him? Someone with a reason, Miss Marple said softly. And reasons, my dear, are often hidden in the smallest things, a word, a look, a moment's indiscretion. Mrs. Carver stood abruptly, smoothing her dress. I'm afraid I have duties to attend to. We shan't keep you. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Carver, Reverend. As they left the vicarage, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle, and Florence opened her umbrella. What a cold woman, she whispered. Did you notice how she dodged your questions, Aunt Jane? And the vicar seemed so nervous. Yes, Miss Marple said, her eyes fixed on the path. Mrs. Carver is guarding something, and her husband knows it. But what, I wonder? And why did she go to the stream alone? They walked in silence for a moment, the stream glinting dully through the rain. Miss Marple paused, her gaze settling. On the spot where Tom Rudd's body had been found, the police barrier was still in place, but the mud had been further disturbed by the rain, obscuring the footprints she had noted earlier. Yet something caught her small, metallic glint among the reeds, half buried in the mud. Florence, do be a dear and fetch that for me, Miss Marple said, pointing. Florence, hesitant but obedient, knelt and retrieved the object, a small, silver cigarette case, its surface engraved with the initials PG. It was dented, as though struck by something heavy, and a faint smear of what might have been blood clung to its edge. Oh, Aunt Jane, Florence gasped, this must belong to Dr. Grayson. Do you think? Hush, my dear, Miss Marple said, taking the case and slipping it into her bag. We mustn't jump to conclusions, but this is a detail worth keeping in mind. As they returned to the cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts churned like the stream itself, questions then answers. Had Dr. Grayson dropped it during a struggle, or had someone placed it there to implicate him? And what of Mrs. Carver's solitary walk, her evasion about the light? The ghostly flame, Miss Marple felt, was the key to unlocking the mystery, but its meaning remained tantalizingly out of reach. Back at the cottage, Florence made tea, her hands still trembling from the discovery. What will you do with the cigarette case, Aunt Jane? Shouldn't we give it to Inspector Crawley? A clue like this is like a stitch in a pattern. It must be placed carefully, or the whole design unravels. As the rain pattered against the windows, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. The cigarette case, Mrs. Carver's unease, the vicar's nervousness, all were threads in the tapestry of Netherby's secrets. And somewhere, she knew, was the thread that would lead to the truth about Tom Rudd's death. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The rain had ceased by the following morning, leaving Netherby-on-Stream draped in a damp, silvery mist that clung to the willows and softened the outlines of the village. Miss Jane Marple sat at the breakfast table in Florence's cottage, her knitting neatly folded beside her, her thoughts as sharp as the needles she wielded. The silver cigarette case, with its engraved initials PG, rested in her bag, a silent reminder of the questions multiplying around Tom Rudd's murder. She had not yet decided what to do with it, for a clue so conveniently placed could be as misleading as it was revealing. Florence, pouring tea, was still rattled by the previous day's discovery. Aunt Jane, I can't stop thinking about that cigarette case. Do you really think Dr. Grayson could have done it? He's so kind, so respected in the village. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over the rim of her teacup. My dear Florence, kindness is no proof of innocence, just as rudeness is no proof of guilt. Dr. Grayson's cigarette case is interesting, but it is what it suggests that matters. Was it dropped in a moment of violence, or placed to cast suspicion? We must look beyond the obvious. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Inspector Crawley, his mustache bristling with purpose. "Good morning, Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart," he said, stepping inside. "I'm making the rounds, gathering more details. I understand you were near the stream yesterday, Miss Marple. Did you notice anything unusual?" Miss Marple's expression was serene. "Only what one might expect after such a tragedy, Inspector. The mud was disturbed, of course, and the scene was much as you found it. But I did wonder about the stream itself, such a quiet place for a murder, don't you think?" Inspector Crawley's eyes narrowed slightly. "Quiet, yes, but convenient. Easy to slip away from the supper unnoticed. We're looking into everyone's movements between 9 and 10 o'clock. Dr. Grayson's alibi is a bit shaky. He says he was tending to a child's injury, but no one can confirm exactly when. And Mr. Finch, the apothecary, was seen near the EU's around 9:30, though he claims he was with Miss Blake." "Most interesting," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. She did not mention the cigarette case, for she preferred to hold such cards close until she understood their value. "And Sir Henry and his daughter, their accounts are clear, I presume?" The inspector frowned. "Sir Henry says he was mingling with guests, but several people recall him stepping away for a time. Miss Clara claims she was dancing or chatting, but her timeline's vague too. As for Mrs. Carver, she insists she was alone by the stream when she found the body, but the vicar's not much help confirming it. Too flustered, that one." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the inspector's words. "A village is a small place, Inspector. People see more than they say, and say more than they mean." Crawley gave her a shrewd look. "You've a sharp eye, Miss Marple. If you notice anything else, you'll let me know." "Of course," she said, her smile disarming. As the inspector left, Miss Marple turned to Florence. "I think, my dear, we should visit the post office today. Miss Blake seemed troubled yesterday, and I suspect she has more to tell." The post office was a cramped, tidy building on the village green, its counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. Miss Dorothy Blake stood behind it, sorting letters with a nervous energy. Her prim demeanor faltered when she saw Miss Marple, her hands fumbling a stack of envelopes. "Good morning, Miss Blake," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "I hope we're not interrupting. I thought you might have a moment to chat about poor Mr. Rudd." Miss Blake's eyes darted to the door, as though expecting someone to enter. It's awful, isn't it? I told you what I knew, Miss Marple. Tom said he'd seen something at the hall, but he didn't explain." "Yes, you mentioned that," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly from her bag. "But I wonder if you've remembered anything else. You see so much here at the post office: letters, visitors, little exchanges. Did Tom ever receive anything unusual, or did anyone else seem out of sorts recently?" Miss Blake hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice low. "Well, there was something. A letter came for Tom about a month ago, from London. No return address, just a plain envelope. He seemed agitated when he collected it, kept looking over his shoulder as if someone might be watching." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Most curious. And did you notice anyone else behaving oddly around that time? Mr. Finch, perhaps? Or Dr. Grayson? Miss Blake's flush returned. Mr. Finch has been tense lately. He's been buying more supplies than usual chemicals, you know, for his apothecary work. And Dr. Grayson, well, he's been distracted. I saw him arguing with Tom by the stream a week ago. Something about money, I think. Money, Miss Marple murmured. A powerful motive, indeed. Thank you, Miss Blake. You've been most helpful. As they left the post office, Florence whispered, Aunt Jane, do you think Mr. Finch or Dr. Grayson could be involved? That cigarette case, and now this talk of arguments and money. Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful. The cigarette case points to Dr. Grayson, and Mr. Finch's chemicals are intriguing, especially given that ghostly flame. But we must be cautious, Florence. The obvious suspect is rarely the true one. It's like knitting a complex pattern one wrong stitch, and the whole design is flawed. They walked toward Willowbank Hall, where Miss Marple hoped to speak with Clara Ashford. The hall's gardens were quiet, the roses Tom had tended still vibrant despite the tragedy. Clara was in the conservatory, arranging flowers with a distracted air. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, and her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart, Clara said, forcing a smile. How kind of you to visit. I'm afraid I'm not much company today. This business with Tom has upset us all. Quite understandable, Miss Marple said, settling onto a wicker chair. He was your groundskeeper for many years, I believe. Did you know him well? Clara's hands paused over a rose. Not really. He kept to himself, mostly. He was good with the gardens, but he could be rude. He said things to me, sometimes impertinent things. Father was cross about it. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but piercing. And last night, during the supper, you were dancing and mingling, I understand. Did you see Tom at all? Clara's fingers tightened around the rose stem, pricking her skin. She winced, a drop of blood welling up. I saw him early in the evening, near the stream. He was watching the guests, as usual. I didn't speak to him. And Dr. Grayson? Miss Marple asked, her tone unchanged. You danced with him, I noticed. He seems a charming man. Clara's cheeks flushed. Philip, Dr. Grayson is a friend. He's been kind to me, especially since Mother died. But he was busy last night, helping with the supper and that child who fell. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Of course, and yet it's curious how everyone's movements seem so fluid between 9 and 10. The stream is such a quiet spot, isn't it? Almost hidden from the marquee. Clara's eyes met Miss Marple's for a moment, then dropped. I suppose so. I didn't go near it, though, not until Mrs. Carver screamed. As they left the conservatory, Miss Marple's thoughts were busy. Clara's nervousness, the letter to Tom, Finch's chemicals, and the cigarette case pointed in different directions, like arrows in a storm. The ghostly flame, she felt, was the key, but its purpose remained elusive. Was it a signal, a distraction, or something else entirely? Back at the cottage, Florence said, Aunt Jane, it's like a tangle of yarn. Everyone seems guilty, but no one quite fits. What do you make of it? Miss Marple smiled faintly. A tangle, yes, but every tangle has a loose end, Florence. We must find it and pull gently. As she resumed her knitting, Miss Marple's mind wove together the threads of suspicion, each clue a stitch in the pattern of murder. The truth, she knew, was close, but it would require patience to unravel. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The mist had lifted by midday, leaving Nether-beyond-stream bathed in a pale, reluctant sunlight that did little to dispel the village's somber mood. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Florence's cottage, her knitting needles moving with their usual rhythmic precision, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape in her lap. The silver cigarette case with the initials PG rested in her bag, its dented surface a silent accusation. The mysterious letter mentioned by Miss Blake, the nervous alibis of the villagers, and the ghostly flame by the stream wove together in her thoughts, forming a pattern that was still incomplete but growing clearer with each new detail. Florence, bustling about with a tray of scones, broke the silence. "Aunt Jane, you've been so quiet all morning. Are you still thinking about that cigarette case? Do you believe Dr. Grayson could be the murderer?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "My dear Florence, a clue is like a single thread in a tapestry. It may seem significant, but without the others, it tells only half the story. The cigarette case is important, but not necessarily because it points to Dr. Grayson. We must look for the inconsistencies, the little things that do not quite fit." Her words were interrupted by a knock at the door. Florence opened it to reveal Mr. Leonard Finch, the apothecary, his wiry frame taut with nervous energy. His pinched face was paler than usual, and his hands fidgeted with the brim of his hat. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped, "I heard you were asking questions about Tom Rudd. I thought I should speak with you. Please come in, Mr. Finch," Miss Marple said, gesturing to a chair. "Would you care for tea?" "No, thank you," Finch replied, sitting stiffly. "I won't stay long. It's just, the village is full of talk, and I don't like the way people are looking at me. Inspector Crawley asked me about my movements at the supper, and I told him I was with Miss Blake most of the evening, but, well, I wasn't always." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes gentle but piercing, indeed. "And where were you, Mr. Finch, between 9 and 10 o'clock, when poor Mr. Rudd met his end?" Finch's fingers twitched. "I stepped away for a bit, to get some air. I was near the EUs, not far from the stream. I didn't see Tom, I swear, but I heard something, a rustling, like someone moving through the reeds. I thought it was an animal, so I didn't investigate. Now I wonder if I should have." "Most interesting," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "And did you notice anything else? A light, perhaps, or a smell?" Finch's eyes widened slightly. "A light? No, nothing like that. But there was a smell sharp, like chemicals or burning metal. I thought it was from the lanterns, but it was stronger by the stream." Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on the detail. A chemical smell, coupled with the ghostly flame she had seen, suggested something deliberate, a flare, perhaps, or a chemical reaction. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," she said. "You've been most helpful. And your apothecary work, does it involve such chemicals? Things that might produce a flame or a distinctive odor?" Finch's flush deepened. "Well, yes. I handle all sorts of compounds, potassium nitrate, magnesium, that sort of thing. But I keep them locked away. No one could have taken anything from my shop without my knowing." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "You must be very careful with such things. Thank you for coming, Mr. Finch." As he left, Florence turned to her aunt, her eyes wide. A chemical smell. Aunt Jane, do you think Mr. Finch made that ghostly flame you saw? Could he have used his chemicals to lure Tom to the stream? It's possible, Miss Marple said, resuming her knitting. But we mustn't leap to conclusions. Mr. Finch is nervous, and nervous people often tell half-truths. The smell he described is a clue, the very particular one. Determined to pursue this thread, Miss Marple suggested they visit Dr. Grayson's surgery. The doctor, as the village's physician, might have insights into Tom Rudd's life, for death and the cigarette case demanded an explanation. The surgery was a small, neat building near the green, its waiting room empty, save for a few chairs and a stack of outdated magazines. Dr. Grayson greeted them with a weary smile, his boyish charm dimmed by fatigue. Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart, he said, ushering them into his office. I'm afraid I'm not at my best today. This business with Tom has shaken everyone. Quite so, Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. You examined the body, I believe. A terrible task. Did you notice anything unusual beyond the wound to the head? Dr. Grayson's hands stilled on his desk. The wound was the main. Thinkling deep, likely from a heavy object. No signs of a struggle, though, which is odd. Tom was a strong man. You'd expect him to fight back. There was a faint smell on his clothes, though something acrid, like chemicals, I thought. It might be from the stream, but it was stronger than that. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A chemical smell, you say? Most curious. And your cigarette case, Dr. Grayson, you still have it? His face paled. My cigarette case. I lost it a few days ago. Dropped it somewhere, I suppose. Why, do you ask? This was found by the stream, near where Tom was killed. It has your initials, I believe. Dr. Grayson stared at the case, his expression a mix of shock and dismay. That's mine, yes, but I swear I didn't drop it there. I haven't been near the stream since. Well, since I argued with Tom last week. It was nothing serious, just a disagreement about the Hall's gardens. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course. And where were you between 9 and 10 on the night of the supper? I told the inspector, Grayson said, his voice tight. I was mingling, then tending to a boy who scraped his knee around 9:15. After that, I was back in the marquee, talking with Clara and others. I didn't go near the stream. Thank you, Dr. Grayson, Miss Marple said, slipping the cigarette case back into her bag. You've been most forthcoming. As they left the surgery, Florence whispered, Aunt Jane, he seemed so shaken. Do you think he's lying about the cigarette case? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her eyes fixed on the stream in the distance. But a liar's fear can be as revealing as an honest man's truth. The chemical smell, Florence, that's the key. It links Mr. Finch, Dr. Grayson, and the ghostly flame I saw. Someone used a chemical to create that light, and I suspect it was no accident. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting resumed. The chemical smell, the flame, the cigarette case all pointed to a deliberate act, but the motive remained elusive. Was Tom lured to the stream by the flame, or was it a signal to someone else? And why was Dr. Grayson's cigarette case so conveniently placed? As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple decided to revisit the stream. The police barrier was still in place, but she slipped beneath it, her eyes scanning the reeds. There, half hidden in the mud, she found another clue, a small, charred fragment of paper its edges singed as though burned. It bore a faint trace of handwriting, only a few letters to T.R., but it was enough to confirm her suspicions. The flame had been no accident, and the letter Miss Blake mentioned might hold the key. Florence, Miss Marple said as they returned to the cottage, "We are getting closer. The pattern is forming, but we need one more thread to tie it together." Florence looked bewildered. "What thread, Aunt Jane?" Miss Marple's smile was serene. "The one that connects the heart to the crime, my dear. Murder is rarely just about violence, it's about what lies beneath." Chapter 7. More lies surface. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Netherby-on-Stream, gilding the willows and lending an air of deceptive calm to the village. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window of Florence's cottage, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm, though her mind was far from the soft wool in her hands. The charred fragment of paper she had found by the stream, marked with the letters to T.R., lay tucked in her bag beside the dented cigarette case. These clues, coupled with the chemical smell and the ghostly flame, were beginning to form a pattern in her mind, a pattern of deceit, motive, and hidden connections. Florence, setting a tray of tea things on the table, broke the silence. "Aunt Jane, that piece of paper you found, it's so small, but you seem to think it's important. Do you believe it's part of the letter Miss Blake mentioned?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she sipped her tea. "Indeed, Florence, a letter, even a fragment, can speak volumes. Tom Rudd received something from London that troubled him, and now we find a burned scrap addressed to him. Someone wished to destroy evidence, my dear, but they were not quite thorough enough." Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Florence opened it to reveal Sir Henry Ashford, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his face etched with strain. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart," he said, bowing slightly. "I hope I'm not intruding. I felt I should call, given everything. The village is in an uproar, and I'm at my wits' end." "Not at all, Sir Henry," Miss Marple said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. You look troubled. Is there something new about poor Mr. Rudd's death?" Sir Henry sank into the chair, his hands clasped tightly. "It's not just Tom's death, though that's bad enough. It's Clara. She's been so quiet since the supper, barely eating, hardly speaking. I'm worried she's keeping something from me, something about Tom." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Miss Clara is a sensitive young woman, Sir Henry. Perhaps she's simply shaken by the tragedy." "Did she know Tom well?" Sir Henry's jaw tightened. "Not well, no. But he was impertinent with her, as I told you. Made remarks about her, and Dr. Grayson insinuated things. I told him to mind his place, but he just laughed. Said he knew things about the hall that would make heads turn. I thought it was bluster, but now—" "Most interesting," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "And what things might those be, Sir Henry? Did Tom ever hint at what he knew?" Sir Henry hesitated, his eyes flickering to the window. "Nothing specific, just vague threats about secrets at Willowbank Hall. I assumed he was fishing for money. He'd been short of funds lately, always asking for advances on his wages. But I never imagined it would come to this." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "And your own movements that night, Sir Henry? You were so busy with the supper. Did you see Tom at all after 9 o'clock?" I caught a glimpse of him near the EUs around 9, Sir Henry said, his voice careful. He was alone, staring at the stream. I was too occupied to pay much attention. After that, I was with guests until the scream. Thank you, Sir Henry, Miss Marple said, resuming her knitting. You've been most helpful. I do hope Clara feels better soon. As Sir Henry left, Florence turned to her aunt, her eyes wide. Aunt Jane, do you think Tom was blackmailing Sir Henry or Clara? Those secrets he mentioned sound suspicious. Blackmail is a dangerous game, Florence, Miss Marple said. And a man like Tom Rudd, with his rough ways and sharp eyes, might well have played it. But with whom, and over what? Determined to probe further, Miss Marple suggested they visit the apothecary shop, hoping to learn more about Mr. Finch's chemicals and his nervous demeanor. The shop was a narrow, dimly lit space, its shelves lined with bottles and jars, the air heavy with the scent of herbs and antiseptics. Mr. Finch stood behind the counter, grinding something in a mortar, his hands unsteady. Good afternoon, Mr. Finch, Miss Marple said, her tone warm. I hope we're not interrupting. I was curious about your work, so fascinating. All these compounds. You mentioned a chemical. Smell by the stream the night of the supper. Could it have come from something in your shop? Finch's pestle paused, his eyes darting to hers. I suppose it's possible, Miss Marple, but I keep everything locked up. Potassium nitrate, magnesium, those could produce a flame or a smell, but I'd know if anything was missing. And I was with Miss Blake most of the evening, as I told you. Yes, of course, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. But you did step away, you said, near the EUs, where you heard a rustling. Did you see anyone else there? Dr. Grayson, perhaps, or Miss Clara? Finch's face flushed. No one specific. It was dark, and the lanterns didn't reach that far. I did see Mrs. Carver walking toward the stream, though, just before 10. She looked purposeful, like she was looking for something. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Mrs. Carver, you say? How curious. And did you notice anything else alight, perhaps, like the one I mentioned? Finch shook his head quickly. No light. No, just the smell, and that rustling. I went back to the marquee soon after. As they left the shop, Florence whispered, Aunt Jane, everyone's stories are so muddled. Mrs. Carver, Mr. Finch, Sir Henry, and that chemical smell keeps coming up. Indeed, Florence, Miss Marple said, her voice calm. Lies are like weeds in a garden. They grow quickly and choke the truth. But we are beginning to see the shape of things. The flame, the smell, the letter, the cigarette, Casal are connected, but not in the way the killer hopes we'll think. That evening, Miss Marple attended a small gathering at the church, organized by the Reverend Carver to pray for Tom Rudd's soul. The villagers sat in the pews, their faces somber, though Miss Marple noted the undercurrents of tension. Clara Ashford sat near the front, her eyes fixed on the altar, while Dr. Grayson lingered at the back, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Carver moved among the parishioners, her demeanor brisk, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor as she handed out hymnals. During a quiet moment, Miss Marple approached the vicar, who was arranging candles at the altar. Reverend Carver, she said softly, you mentioned Tom's troubles with others in the village. Did he ever confide in you about a letter he received, perhaps from London? The vicar's hands fumbled with a candle, nearly dropping it. A letter? No, he never mentioned anything like that. Tom wasn't one for confidences. He did. say once that he'd seen something at the hall that worried him. I thought it was just his temper talking. Miss Marple nodded, her expression gentle. And Mrs. Carver's walked by the stream did. She'll tell you why she went there alone. The vicar's eyes flickered to his wife, who was speaking with Miss Blake. She needed air, she said. Evelyn is particular. She doesn't like crowds. I didn't think much of it until she found him. Thank you, Reverend, Miss Marple said, her mind noting the vicar's unease. As she returned to her seat, she caught a glance between Clara and Dr. Grisson, a glance that held more than friendship, she thought. And Mrs. Carver, handing out hymnals, seemed to avoid looking at either of them. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. The web of lies was Growington's hints of secrets, Sir Henry's vague alibi, Mrs. Carver's solitary walk, Finch's chemicals, and Clara's nervousness. The charred paper and the chemical smell pointed to a deliberate act, perhaps to lure or distract. But whose secret had Tom uncovered, and why had it cost him his life? Florence, Miss Marple said, her voice quiet but firm. Tomorrow we must speak with Miss Clara again. There is a thread in her story that does not quite match, and I believe it may lead us to the heart of this mystery. Florence looked puzzled. Clara. But she's so gentle, Aunt Jane. What could she be hiding? Miss Marple's smile was serene. Gentleness, my dear, can hide a great deal, especially when the heart is involved. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Netherby-on-Stream, casting a gentle light on the village's thatched roofs and the glistening waters of the River Wye. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Florence's breakfast table, sipped her tea with a calm that belied the storm of thoughts in her mind. The charred paper fragment, the dented cigarette case, the chemical smell. Yet one thread human emotion remained. Marple knew it often held the key to unraveling a crime. Florence, arranging a vase of daisies, glanced at her aunt. Aunt Jane, you said last night we should speak with Clara again. Do you really think she's hiding something? She seems so... Fragility, Florence, can be a mask. Miss Clara is young, but youth does not preclude secrets. Her glances at Dr. Grayson, her hesitation when speaking of Tom Rudd, these suggest a heart in turmoil. And turmoil, my dear, often leads to truth. Determined to probe further, Miss Marple set out for Willowbank Hall, Florence trailing behind. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Clara Ashford was in the drawing-room, her auburn hair loosely pinned, her hands fidgeting with a lace handkerchief. She rose as Miss Marple entered, her smile strained. Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart, Clara said, her voice soft. How kind of you to call. I'm afraid I'm still rather shaken. Quite understandable, my dear, Miss Marple said, settling into a plush chair, her knitting bag at her side. A tragedy like this touches everyone. I was just thinking of poor Mr. Rudd. You mentioned he was impertinent with you. Did that happen often? Clara's fingers tightened on the handkerchief, her eyes dropping. He made remarks sometimes about my walks with Philip Dr. Grayson. He said things like, it was upsetting, but I tried to ignore him. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. And did Dr. Grayson know of these remarks? He seems a protective friend. Clara's cheeks flushed. I told him once or twice. He was angry, said Tom had no right to speak to me that way. But Philip wouldn't. He couldn't have done this. He's too kind, of course, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. And that night, during the supper, you were dancing and mingling. Did you see Tom after 9 o'clock, perhaps near the stream?" Clara's eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, or guilt. "No, I didn't. With Philip or father, until Mrs. Carver screamed." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "I see. And yet it's curious, isn't it? So many people were near the stream that night, Mrs. Carver, Mr. Finch, perhaps others, and there was a light, a strange flame, just before the scream. Did you notice it?" Clara's hands stilled, her face paling. "A flame? No, I didn't see anything like that. I was too busy with the guests." Her voice wavered, and she looked away, her handkerchief now twisted into a knot. Before Miss Marple could press further, the door opened, and Dr. Philip Grayson entered, his face drawn. "Clara, He stopped, seeing Miss Marple. "Oh, Miss Marple, Mrs. Hart, I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all, Dr. Grayson," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "We were just speaking of the supper. You were busy that night, I recall, tending to a child's injury. Did you see Miss Clara around 9:30? Dr. Grayson's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Clara. "Yes, I saw her in the marquee, dancing with some of the younger folk. I was back and forth, helping where needed." Clara nodded quickly, too quickly, Miss Marple thought. "Yes, Philip was there. We were together most of the evening." Miss Marple's smile was disarming. How reassuring. "And yet, your cigarette case, Dr. Whodunit, was found by the stream. A curious place to lose it, don't you think?" Dr. Grayson's hand went to his pocket, as though instinctively checking for the case. "I told you, I lost it days before. I wasn't near the stream that night." As Miss Marple and Florence left the hall, Florence whispered, "Aunt Jane, did you see how Clara reacted when you mentioned the flame? And Dr. Grayson, he seemed so defensive. They're hiding something, aren't they?" "Indeed, Florence," Miss Marple said, her voice calm. "They are protecting each other, or perhaps something deeper." But it was Clara's reaction to the flame that struck me most. She knows more than she says. That afternoon, Miss Marple decided to revisit the stream, hoping the daylight might reveal more clues. The police barrier was gone, the area now open but still marked by the tragedy. The mud had dried, but the reeds remained bent where Tom's body had lain. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the bank, and she noticed something new, a faint scorch mark on a flat stone near the water, barely visible unless one looked closely. It was circular, about the size of a shilling, and smelled faintly of chemicals. "Florence, look here," Miss Marple said, pointing. "This market's from a flame, I'm sure of it. Not a natural fire, but something deliberate, like the one I saw." Florence knelt, peering at the stone. "It's so small, Aunt Jane. Could it really matter?" "Small things often matter most," Miss Marple said. "This mark, the chemical smell, the charred paper, they all point to a plan. Carefully laid. Someone used a flame to draw Tom to the stream, or to signal another." As they returned to the cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Clara's hesitation, Dr. Grayson's defensiveness, and the web of alibis that seemed to unravel with each new detail. The emotional weight of the case was becoming clear. Love, fear, and secrets were at its heart. But was it love, jealousy, or something else? The room was crowded, the air thick with tension. Sir Henry sat at the front, his face stern, while Clara stayed close to him, his posture rigid. Mrs. Carver distributed tea, her movements brisk but her face pale. Mr. Finch and Miss Blake sat together, whispering, and the Reverend Carver fidgeted with his prayer book. Inspector Crawley cleared his throat. "We've made progress, but I'll need your cooperation. A chemical residue was found on the bank, possibly from a flare or signal. If anyone knows anything about this, speak now." And Miss Marple saw a flash of fear. Mrs. Carver's cup rattled in its saucer, and Mr. Finch's fingers twitched as the meeting ended. Clara approached Miss Marple, her voice trembling. "Miss Marple, I need to tell you something. Not here, but tomorrow, at the hall, please." Back at the cottage, Florence was beside herself. "Aunt Jane, Clara's going to confess something." "But confessions are rarely complete, Florence. Clara is frightened, and fear can loosen the tongue, but it can also obscure the truth. Tomorrow we shall see." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove the clues together. The flame, the scorch mark, the chemical smell, the letter, and now Clara's sudden need to speak. The emotional turning point had arrived, and with it, the promise of a revelation. Chapter 9. The trap. The morning air in Nether-beyond-stream carried a crisp edge, as though the village itself were holding its breath. Miss Jane Marple sat at Florence's breakfast table, her knitting needles still, her mind weaving the threads of the mystery into a tighter pattern. Clara Ashford's trembling request to speak privately, the scorched stone by the stream, the chemical smell, the charred paper fragment, and the dented cigarette casal pointed to a deliberate act of murder, orchestrated with care, but unraveling under scrutiny. Miss Marple sensed the time had come to apply gentle pressure, to set a trap that would coax the truth from the tangled web of lies. Florence, pouring tea, glanced nervously at her aunt. "Aunt Jane, do you think Clara will tell you who killed Tom Rudd? She looked so frightened last night. What if she's in danger?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over her teacup. "Fear, my dear Florence, is a great revealer. Clara knows something, perhaps not the whole truth, but enough to unsettle her. Today we must listen carefully, for what she does not say may be as important as what she does." They set out for Willowbank Hall, the path lined with Duchist hedgerows. The hall loomed ahead, its Georgian facade serene but heavy with secrets. Clara met them at the door, her auburn hair neatly pinned, but her eyes shadowed with worry. She led them to the conservatory, where the air was thick with the scent of roses. "Thank you for coming, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice low. I couldn't sleep last night. I keep thinking about Tom and what happened. I need to tell you something, but you must promise not to tell Father or the police not yet." Miss Marple's expression was gentle but alert. "My dear, I will listen with care. What troubles you?" Clara twisted her handkerchief, her eyes darting to the windows. "It's about Philip Dr. Grayson. That night at the supper, I saw him leave the marquee around 9:30. He said he was checking on the child he'd treated, but he went toward the stream. I followed him just for a moment. I saw a light, a strange flame, near the EUs. It frightened me, so I went back to the marquee. But I didn't tell the inspector, because I'm afraid for Philip." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, though her hands were still. "A flame, you say? Most interesting. And did you see Tom Rudd or anyone else near the stream?" Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, just the light, I thought. It was a lantern at first, but it was different. Blue, almost ghostly. I didn't stay long." Philip came back to the marquee soon after, and he seemed upset, but he wouldn't say why. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. And your friendship with Dr. Grayson, Tom made remarks about it, I believe. Did those remarks trouble you? Clara's cheeks flushed. Tom was cruel. He hinted that Philip and that we were more than friends. It's not true, not like that. Philip's been kind to me since Mother died, but Father wouldn't understand. Tom threatened. To tell him things lies, mostly, but enough to cause trouble. Thank you, Clara, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. You've been very brave to tell me this. I shall keep it in confidence for now, but you must be prepared to speak to the inspector if needed. As they left the conservatory, Florence, whispered Aunt Jane, Clara saw the flame, and Dr. Grayson was near the stream. Do you think he's the killer? Not yet, Florence, Miss Marple said, her eyes fixed on the path. Clara's story confirms the flame was real and deliberate. But her fear for Dr. Grayson suggests loyalty, not guilt. We must test the threads we've gathered. Miss Marple decided the time had come to gather the suspects and apply psychological pressure. She sent a note to Inspector Crawley, suggesting a meeting at Willowbank Hall that evening to discuss the case. She also asked Florence to invite Sir Henry, Clara, Dr. Grayson, Mr. Finch, Miss Blake, and the Carvers, framing it as a chance to clear up inconsistencies. The inspector, though skeptical, agreed. Intrigued by Miss Marple's reputation, the drawing room at Willowbank Hall was a grand space, its walls lined with portraits and its windows overlooking the darkened gardens. The group assembled uneasily, Sir Henry stern and authoritative, Clara pale and fidgeting, Dr. Grayson, his jaw tight, Mr. Finch, his hands restless, Miss Blake, prim but nervous, Mrs. Carver, her face a mask of propriety, and the Reverend Carver, wringing his hands. Inspector Crawley stood by the fireplace, his notebook ready, while Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting in her lap. Thank you all for coming, Miss Marple began, her voice calm but carrying a subtle authority. The death of Tom Rudd has cast a shadow over Netherby, and I believe we are close to lifting it. Inspector, perhaps you could share your findings. Crawley cleared his throat. We've confirmed Tom was killed by a blow to the head, likely with a heavy object between 9 and 9:30. A chemical residue was found near the stream, suggesting a flare or signal. We also found a cigarette case belonging to Dr. Grayson near the body. A murmur ran through the room. Dr. Grayson's face paled, and Clara's hands clenched. I told you, I lost that case days before, Grayson said, his voice strained. I wasn't near the stream at 9:30. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Indeed, Dr. Grayson, but let us consider the flame seen by more than one person. I believe a blue, ghostly light, accompanied by a chemical smell. Mr. Finch, you mentioned such a smell near the eaves. Could it have come from your shop? Finch's fingers twitched. I suppose it's possible, but I keep my chemicals secure. Someone would have had to break in, and I'd know. Mrs. Carver's cup rattled in its saucer. This is nonsense, she said sharply. I saw no flame, only poor Tom in the water. I was alone, as I told you. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. Mrs. Carver, you were seen walking toward the stream just before 10, and yet you claim you saw nothing until you found the body. It's curious, isn't it, how many were near the stream? That night, Dr. Grayson, Mr. Finch, yourself, and yet no one saw the killer. The room grew tense, eyes darting between suspects. Sir Henry spoke up, his voice gruff. Miss Marple, what are you suggesting? That one of us is lying? Not one, Sir Henry, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. Several. Tom Rudd knew something secrets about Willowbank Hall, perhaps. He received a letter from London, parts of which were burned and left by the stream. Someone used a chemical flare to lure him there, or to signal another. The question is, who had the most to lose from Tom's knowledge? Clara's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. Stop it, please. I can't bear it. Philip didn't do it. I know he didn't. Dr. Grayson stepped forward, his voice urgent. Clara, don't say anything more. Miss Marple, I swear I didn't kill Tom. Yes, I was near the stream, checking on the child's mother, who was worried. I saw the flame, but I didn't know what it was. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Thank you, Dr. Grayson, and thank you, Clara, for your honesty. But there is one more piece to this puzzle piece that will reveal the truth. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Miss Marple's trap had been set, and she watched each face, noting the fear, the guilt, the defiance. The killer, she knew, was among them, and the pressure of this moment would force a mistake. As they dispersed, Florence whispered, Aunt Jane, you've stirred them up. Do you know who did it? Not yet, Florence, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. But the net is tightening. Tomorrow we shall see who stumbles. Chapter 10. The reveal. The evening air in Nether-beyond-stream was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wilting roses, as though the village itself were exhaling its secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room of Willowbank Hall, her lavender coat neatly folded over the arm of her chair, her knitting needles silent for once. The room was filled with the same group as the previous night: Sir Henry Ashford, stern and watchful; Clara Ashford, pale and trembling; Dr. Philip Grayson, his jaw set; Mr. Leonard Finch, fidgeting nervously; Miss Dorothy Blake, prim but uneasy; Mrs. Evelyn Carver, her face a mask of composure; and the Reverend Thomas Carver, wringing his hands. Inspector Crawley stood by the fireplace, his mustache bristling with anticipation, his notebook poised. Miss Marple had requested this gathering, promising to shed light on Tom Rudd's murder, and the tension in the room was palpable. Miss Marple began, her voice soft but commanding attention. Good evening, everyone. We are here to resolve the tragic matter of Tom Rudd's death. A man was struck down by the stream, and a web of lies has tried to conceal the truth. But the truth, you see, is like a stitch in a pattern. It cannot be hidden forever if one looks closely. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, noting each face. Let us begin with the facts. Tom Rudd was killed between 9 and 9:30 on the night of the harvest supper, struck on the temple with a heavy object, a chemical flare, ghostly flame. As I saw, it burned briefly by the stream, leaving a scorched mark and a chemical smell. A fragment of a burned letter addressed to Tom was found, as was Dr. Grayson's cigarette case, dented and smeared with blood. These clues, combined with your own accounts, tell a story. Dr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably. I've said it before, Miss Marple, that cigarette case was lost days earlier. I didn't kill Tom. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. I believe you, Dr. Grayson. The cigarette case was placed to mislead, a clumsy attempt to cast suspicion. But let us consider the flame. It was no accident, but a deliberate act created. With chemicals, potassium nitrate, or magnesium, perhaps, as Mr. Finch could confirm. Finch's hands twitched. I told you, my chemicals are secure. No one took anything from my shop. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. But chemicals are not so hard to come by, especially for someone with knowledge. The flame was meant to lure Tom to the stream or to signal another, and the letter, burned but not destroyed, suggests Tom knew something dangerous. Sir Henry's voice was gruff. Miss Marple, are you saying Tom was blackmailing someone? He hinted at secrets, but I thought it was idle talk. Not idle, Sir Henry, Miss Marple said. Tom Rudd was a man who saw too much. He worked at Willowbank Hall, tended your gardens, and watched your lives. He received a letter from London, a letter that upset him, as Miss Blake observed. That letter held a secret, one worth killing to protect. Clara's hands clenched, her voice a whisper. What secret, Miss Marple? What could Tom have known? Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. Let us reconstruct the night. Between 9 and 9:30, Tom was lured to the stream by the flare. Someone struck him with a heavy object, perhaps a stone or a tool from the gardens. The killer then placed Dr. Grayson's cigarette case nearby, hoping to divert suspicion. But the flame, the chemical smell, and the burned letter point to a deeper motive. She turned to Mrs. Carver, whose composure faltered slightly. Mrs. Carver, you were seen walking toward the stream just before 10, and you found the body. You claimed you saw no flame, but I believe you did. You went to the stream for a reason, didn't you? Mrs. Carver's eyes widened, her voice sharp. I told you I needed air. I saw nothing until I found Tom. Miss Marple's needles, though still, seemed to hum with purpose. And yet, your husband mentioned Tom's worries about something at the hall. And Miss Blake saw you arguing with Tom a week before his death about money, she thought. Tom knew something about you, Mrs. Carver, something you feared he would reveal. The Reverend Carver's face paled. Evelyn, what is she talking about? Mrs. Carver's hands trembled, but she held her head high. This is absurd. Tom was a crude man, always making trouble. I had no reason to harm him. Miss Marple's voice was calm but relentless. Tom Rudd knew of a secret affair, didn't he? Not between Clara and Dr. Grayson, as he taunted, but between you, Mrs. Carver, and Sir Henry Ashford. The letter from London was from an old acquaintance of yours, someone who knew of your past indiscretions. Tom intercepted it, perhaps while working at the hall, and used it to demand money from you. A gasp rippled through the room. Sir Henry's face reddened. This is outrageous. Miss Marple, you go too far. But Mrs. Carver's composure cracked, her hands flying to her face. No, it's not true, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't kill him. Yes, there was a letter, and Tom found it. He threatened to tell Thomas, to ruin us. I paid him what I could, but I didn't kill him. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. I believe you, Mrs. Carver, about the murder. You paid Tom to keep silent, but someone else feared his knowledge more. Someone who knew of your affair and saw Tom's blackmail as a threat to their own position. She turned to Sir Henry, whose face was now ashen. Sir Henry, you were near the EUs at 9, you said. You saw Tom, and you knew what he held over Mrs. Carver. You feared he would expose you, ruin your reputation, and perhaps destroy Clara's future. So you acted. You used a chemical flare obtained from Mr. Finch's shop, perhaps, or elsewhere to lure Tom to the stream. You struck him with a garden tool, then placed Dr. Grayson's cigarette case to shift blame. Sir Henry's voice was a growl. This is preposterous. I was with guests all evening. Not all evening, Miss Marple said. Several people noted your absence between 9 and 9:30. The flare's chemical smell lingered, and the scorched stone marked its place. You burned the letter, but a fragment survived. Your motive was not just to protect yourself, but to protect Clara, whom you feared Tom would drag into scandal. Clara sobbed, clutching Dr. Grayson's arm. Father, no. Tell her it's not true. Sir Henry's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling. I couldn't let him destroy us. Tom was a leech, threatening to tell everyone about Evelyn and me. I only meant to frighten him, but he laughed, taunted me. I picked up a stone. I didn't mean to kill him. Inspector Crawley stepped forward, his voice grim. Sir Henry Ashford, you're under arrest for the murder of Tom Rudd. As the inspector led Sir Henry away, the room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Carver wept, her husband staring in shock. Clara clung to Dr. Grayson, her sobs muffled. Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting resumed, her eyes serene. Florence, wide-eyed, whispered Aunt Jane, how did you know? Miss Marple's smile was gentle. People, Florence, are predictable in their weaknesses. Sir Henry's pride, Mrs. Carver's fear, Tom's greed, they wove the pattern. The flame was the key, a signal of intent, and the rest followed. As the villagers dispersed, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the stream, its quiet waters, hiding the truth until she had pulled the right thread. Chapter 11. The reflection. The morning after Sir Henry Ashford's arrest dawned quietly over Netherby-on-Stream. The village bathed in a soft golden light that seemed to cleanse the air of its recent shadows. The River Wye flowed serenely, its surface unbroken by the ghostly flame that had marked Tom Rudd's final moments. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlor of Florence's cottage, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, the scarf in her lap nearly complete. Her sharp blue eyes, though were distant, reflecting on the events that had unraveled the village's secrets. Florence, setting a tray of tea and biscuits on the table, was still reeling from the previous night's revelation. Aunt Jane, she said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief, I can't believe it was Sir Henry. He seemed so respectable. How did you know it was him, and not Mrs. Carver or Dr. Grayson? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her needles pausing as she sipped her tea. My dear Florence, respectability is often a cloak for the most desperate acts. Sir Henry's pride, his position in the village, his love for his daughter, these were the threads that drove him to murder. People, you see, are not so very different. Whether in Netherby or St. Mary Mead, their motives, greed, fear, love are universal, and their actions betray them. She set her cup down, her eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. The ghostly flame was the key. It was no accident, but a deliberate lure created with chemicals to draw Tom Rudd to the stream. Sir Henry, with his military precision, knew how to use such a device perhaps from his days in the army, or through access to Mr. Finch's supplies. The scorched stone and chemical smell confirmed it. The burned letter, addressed to Tom, hinted at blackmail, and Sir Henry's vague alibi, coupled with his absence between 9 and 9:30, pointed to his guilt. Florence leaned forward, her eyes wide. But the cigarette case, Aunt Jane, why was it there? And why did Clara and Dr. Grayson seem so frightened? Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking. The cigarette case was a clumsy attempt to shift blame to Dr. Grayson. Sir Henry likely found it. Dr. Grayson had lost it days before, placed it near the body, hoping to mislead the police. As for Clara and Dr. Grayson, their fear stemmed from love, not guilt. Clara suspected her father's secret affair with Mrs. Carver, and Tom's taunts about her and Dr. Grayson made her fear exposure. Dr. Grayson, in turn, was protecting Clara, knowing she was hiding something. Their alibis were vague because they were shielding each other, not because they were guilty. Florence shook her head, marveling. It's like one of your knitting patterns, Aunt Jane. Everything fits together once you see the design. But poor Mrs. Carversham must be devastated, with her affair exposed and Sir Henry arrested. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. Mrs. Carver's secret was the spark that set this tragedy in motion. Tom Rudd, with his sharp eyes and greedy heart, saw their indiscretions and used the letter from London to extort money. Mrs. Carver paid him, but Sir Henry, fearing scandal and the ruin of Clara's future, took a more drastic step. It is often so. Florence secrets beget secrets, and violence follows. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Inspector Crawley, his mustache less bristling now, his expression one of grudging respect. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside, "I owe you my thanks." Sir Henry's confessed admitted to striking Tom with a garden stone, after luring him with a flare he made from chemicals pilfered from Finch's shop, said he only meant to frighten him. But, well, it's done. You've a sharp mind, ma'am. Miss Marple's smile was modest. "Thank you, Inspector. I only observed what was there to see. The village told its own story, if one listened." Crawley nodded, scribbling a note. "We found the remains of the letter in Sir Henry's study, a few scraps he didn't burn completely. It was from a woman in London, someone Mrs. Carver knew years ago, hinting at their past. Tom got hold of it and saw his chance. A nasty business. Very nasty," Miss Marple agreed. "But the truth, Inspector, has a way of surfacing, like a stone in a stream." As Crawley left, Florence turned to her aunt. "Will you stay longer, Aunt Jane? The village feels different now, with Sir Henry gone and Clara so heartbroken." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "A few days more, perhaps, to see Clara settled. She is young, and Dr. Grayson will be a comfort to her, I think. But my time here is nearly done. Netherby will heal, as villages do, though it will carry its scars." That afternoon, Miss Marple walked to the stream one last time, her steps slow but deliberate. The water flowed as it always had, its surface calm, hiding the violence it had witnessed. She stood by the spot where Tom Rudd had died, her eyes tracing the now faded scorch mark on the stone. The ghostly flame was gone, its purpose served, but its memory lingered in her mind, a reminder of how even the smallest detail could illuminate the darkest truth. As she returned to the cottage, Miss Marple reflected on the nature of human weakness. "People are so very predictable," she murmured to herself. "They guard their secrets with such care, yet leave them scattered like petals in a garden. One need only pick them up." Back at the cottage, she packed her knitting, her scarf now complete, its pattern flawless. She would leave Netherby soon, her work done, but she knew other villages, other secrets, would call her in time. For now, She was content to sit by the fire, her mind at rest, the mystery of the ghostly flame solved. Chapter 12. The echoes of Truth-a-days following Sir Henry Ashford's arrest settled over Nether-beyond-stream like a gentle mist, softening the sharp edges of the village's recent turmoil. The River Wye flowed as it always had its waters, reflecting the pale August sky, but the village felt subtly changed, as though the revelation of Tom Rudd's murder had lifted a veil, exposing both its beauty and its flaws. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Florence's parlor, worked on a new knitting project, a delicate lace shawl, her needles moving with their familiar precision. Her thoughts, however, lingered on the human frailties that had woven the tragedy she had unraveled. Florence, bringing in a tray of tea and scones, was still grappling with the case's resolution. "Aunt Jane," she said, setting the tray down, "I can't stop thinking about Clara. Poor girl, losing her father like this, and with such a scandal. Do you think she'll be all right?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she poured her tea. "Clara is young, Florence, and youth is resilient. She has Dr. Grayson to lean on, and I suspect their friendship may deepen in time. Grief is a heavy burden, but it often clears the way for truth and healing." Florence sat, her hands fidgeting. "And Mrs. Carver, how will she face the village, with everyone knowing about her and Sir Henry? The vicar must be heartbroken." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "The Reverend Carver is a gentle soul, and this betrayal will wound him deeply. But people are capable of forgiveness, Florence, especially when love is at stake. Mrs. Carver's shame will fade, and the village will find its balance again. It always does." The morning passed quietly, but Miss Marple's thoughts were active, piecing together the final threads of the case. The ghostly flame, the scorched stone, the charred letter fragment, and the dented cigarette case had all played their parts. But it was the human motives, Sir Henry's pride, Mrs. Carver's fear, Tom Rudd's greed, that had driven the crime. Miss Marple had seen such patterns before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond, and she knew they would repeat as long as human hearts held secrets. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Miss Dorothy Blake, the postmistress, her prim demeanor softened by a hesitant smile. "Miss Marple," she said, clutching a small parcel, "I wanted to thank you. The village feels lighter, somehow, now that the truth is out. I brought you this a little gift from the post office." Miss Marple accepted the parcel, a box of fine writing paper, with a gracious nod. "How kind of you, Miss Blake. I'm glad to have been of service. You were most helpful, you know, with your observations about Tom's letter." Miss Blake's cheeks flushed. "I didn't do much, really. I saw how troubled Tom was, and I couldn't keep quiet. I'm glad you understood what it meant." "You see a great deal at the post office," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "Letters, parcels, conversations, they tell a story, if one listens. You must take care, though, not to let such stories weigh too heavily." Miss Blake nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll try." "Thank you, Miss Marple." As she left, Miss Marple noted the lightness in her step, a sign that Netherby was beginning to heal. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Willowbank Hall to check on Clara. The hall, though still grand, seemed quieter, its rooms echoing with the absence of Sir Henry. Clara met her in the drawing-room, her auburn hair neatly pinned, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. Dr. Grayson was with her, his hand resting protectively on her arm. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "I can't thank you enough. It's awful what Father did, but knowing the truth is better than living with lies. Philip and I were going to London for a while to get away from all this." Dr. Grayson nodded, his boyish charm tempered by resolve. "We'll look after each other. Clara's been through enough, and I won't let her face it alone." Miss Marple's smile was warm. "A wise decision, my dear. Time and distance can mend many wounds. And Dr. Grayson, do take care of that cigarette case in the futurette," caused quite a stir. Grayson managed a wry smile. "I'll have my initials engraved on something less likely to be misplaced, I promise." As Miss Marple left the hall, she paused by the stream, its banks now undisturbed, the scorched stone barely visible in the grass. She thought of the ghostly flame, a fleeting signal that had illuminated a village's darkest secrets. It was a reminder, she mused, that even the smallest spark could reveal a hidden truth. Back at the cottage, Florence was packing a small suitcase, for Miss Marple had decided to return to St. Mary Mead the next day. "Aunt Jane," Florence said, folding a shawl, "you've done so much for Netherby. Will you come back some day?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "Villages are much alike, Florence, and yet each has its own story. I've learned a great deal here, but St. Mary Mead calls me home." As the evening settled over Netherby, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting nearly finished. She reflected on the case, not just the murder, but the lives it had touched. Sir Henry's pride had led to violence, Mrs. Carver's fear to betrayal, and Tom Rudd's greed to his end. Yet Clara's courage, Dr. Grayson's loyalty, and even Miss Blake's quiet honesty had shown the village's strength. "People," Miss Marple murmured to herself, "are so very human. Their flaws make them predictable, but their goodness makes them worth understanding." With that, she tucked her knitting into her bag, ready to leave Netherby-on-Stream and its secrets behind, knowing the village would find its way, as all villages do. Chapter 13. The ties that bind the morning sun rose over Netherby-on-Stream with a clarity that seemed to promise renewal, its rays glinting off the River Wye and casting a soft glow on the village's thatched cottages. Miss Jane Marple, preparing for her departure to St. Mary Mead, sat at Florence's breakfast table, her knitting bag packed but a final skein of wool in her hands, as though reluctant to leave the village's story unfinished. The mystery of Tom Rudd's murder had been solved, but its ripples continued to spread, touching lives in ways both subtle and profound. Florence, bustling about with a tray of toast and marmalade, was still marveling at her aunt's insight. "Aunt Jane," she said, setting the tray down, "you've left such a mark on Netherby. Everyone's talking about how you saw through Sir Henry's lies. But I keep wondering about Mrs. Carver and the vicar. How will they go on after all?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she spread marmalade on her toast. "People are remarkably adaptable. Florence, Mrs. Carver's indiscretion has wounded her husband, but the Reverend Carver is a man of faith, and faith often leads to forgiveness. They will find a way, though it may take time. Villages, you see, have a way of knitting themselves back together." Her words were interrupted by a knock at the door. Florence opened it to reveal the Reverend Thomas Carver, his thin frame stooped but his face calmer than it had been in days. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice hesitant but sincere, "I wanted to see you before you leave. Evelyn and I We owe you a great deal. The truth was painful, but it's freed us to face our mistakes." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "You are very kind, Reverend. The truth can be a heavy burden, but it is lighter than deceit. How is Mrs. Carver faring?" The vicar's eyes softened. "She's struggling, but we're really talking for the first time in years. I didn't see her pain before. Her need for something more. We'll stay in Netherby, try to rebuild trust. The village needs us, and I believe we need it too." "That is wise," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her work. "A village is like a family. Reverend Did thrives on honesty, even when it hurts. I wish you strength." As the vicar left, Florence turned to her aunt, her eyes wide. "Aunt Jane, it's almost like you've mended the village, not just solved a murder. Do you always leave things so settled?" Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Settled is a strong word, my dear. I only pull the loose threads, and people do the rest. Human nature is like a garden prune. The weeds and the flowers find their way." Determined to make one final round before her departure, Miss Marple suggested a walk to the village green. The air was crisp, the green bustling with early morning activity as villagers prepared for market day. Miss Dorothy Blake was at the post office, sorting letters with a newfound confidence. She waved to Miss Marple, her prim demeanor softened by gratitude. "Miss Marple," she called, stepping outside, "I heard you're leaving today. I just wanted to say, you've made me see things differently. I used to think keeping quiet was best, but speaking up about Tom's letter, it felt right." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "You did well, Miss Blake. A village thrives on its watchers, and you see more than most. Keep watching, but with kindness." Further along, Miss Marple spotted Mr. Leonard Finch outside his apothecary shop, arranging a display of herbal remedies. He looked up, his pinched face less tense than before. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding, "I suppose I should thank you. The inspector cleared me of any theft. Those chemicals were taken from an old stock I'd discarded. I'm more careful now." "That is prudent, Mr. Finch," Miss Marple said. "Chemicals, like secrets, must be handled with care. You've a good heart, I think, despite your nerves." Finch flushed, managing a small smile. "You're kind to say so. Safe travels, Miss Marple." As they neared the stream, Miss Marple paused, her eyes tracing the now familiar spot where Tom Rudd had died. The scorched stone was barely visible, the reeds upright once more. She thought of the ghostly flame, a fleeting signal that had illuminated a village's hidden truth, Sir Henry's affair, Mrs. Carver's shame, Tom's greed. Each had played a part, but it was the ties between them, love, loyalty, fear, that had woven the tragedy. Florence, sensing her aunt's mood, said, "Aunt Jane, do you ever feel sad leaving a place like this, knowing what people are capable of?" Miss Marple's smile was wistful. "Sometimes, Florence, but I also see their goodness, Clara's courage, Dr. Grayson's loyalty, even Miss Blake's quiet honesty. People err, but they also mend. That is what makes them worth understanding." Back at the cottage, Miss Marple finished packing, her lace shawl neatly folded in her suitcase. As she closed it, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The mystery of the ghostly flame was solved, but more importantly, Netherby-on-Stream was finding its way back to itself. The ties that bound its people, frail, flawed, and human, would hold, as they always did. "Florence," Miss Marple said, slipping on her coat. I shall miss your tea, but St. Mary Mead awaits. There are always new patterns to unravel. Florence hugged her aunt tightly. Come back soon, Aunt Jane. Netherby won't be the same without you. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Nor I without it, my dear. But life, like knitting, goes on one stitch at a time. Chapter 14. The last thread. The afternoon sun hung low over Netherby stream, casting a warm amber glow across the village's cobblestone lanes and the tranquil waters of the River Wye. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of Florence's garden, her suitcase packed and ready for her journey back to St. Mary Mead. Her lavender coat was buttoned neatly, her knitting bag slung over her arm, but her sharp blue eyes lingered on the village, as though reluctant to leave its story entirely behind. The mystery of Tom Rudd's murder had been solved, yet the echoes of its resolution still resonated like the final notes of a melody. Florence, fussing with a basket of provisions for her aunt's train journey, joined her in the garden. Aunt Jane, she said, her voice tinged with wistfulness, I wish you could stay longer. Netherby feels safer with you here, somehow. Do you think the village will ever forget what happened? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her gaze fixed on the distant stream. Forget? No, Florence. Villages have long memories, like old women, but they learn to carry their stories lightly, weaving them into the fabric of daily life. Netherby will remember Tom Rudd, Sir Henry, and the ghostly flame, but it will move forward. Her thoughts drifted to the clues that had unraveled the case: the scorched stone, the chemical smell, the charred letter fragment, the dented cigarette case. Each had played its part, but it was the human threads: Sir Henry's pride, Mrs. Carver's shame, Clara's loyalty, that had formed the heart of the mystery. Miss Marple had seen such patterns before in countless villages, and she knew they were as timeless as the seasons. As they walked toward the village station, Miss Marple paused at the churchyard, where the roses in the vicarage garden bloomed. With quiet defiance, the Reverend Thomas Carver was there, tending the flower beds with a care that spoke of healing. He looked up, his thin face softened by a tentative smile. Miss Marple, he said, brushing soil from his hands, you're leaving us, I hear. I wanted to say again how grateful we are. Evelyn and I were finding our way. The village has been kind, despite everything. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Kindness is a village's strength, Reverend. You and Mrs. Carver will mend, as will Netherby. Take care of those roses. They're a reminder that beauty persists even after storms. The vicar nodded, his eyes misty. I will. Safe travels, Miss Marple. At the station, a small crowd had gathered to see her off. Miss Dorothy Blake stood clutching a letter, her prim demeanor now laced with warmth. Miss Marple, she said, pressing the letter into her hands. A little note from the village, to thank you. You've taught me to speak up, and I shan't forget it. Miss Marple tucked the letter into her bag, her smile gracious. You've a sharp eye, Miss Blake. Use it wisely, and Netherby will thrive. Mr. Leonard Finch was there too, his wiry frame less tense, his hands steady. I've locked my chemicals tighter than ever, Miss Marple, he said, a wry grin breaking through. No more ghostly flames on my account. Thank you for setting things right. You're a good man, Mr. Finch, Miss Marple replied. Keep your shop hand, your heart open to the village. As the train's whistle sounded, Clara Ashford and Dr. Philip Grayson approached, hand in hand. Clara's face was pale, but resolute, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice steady, "Philip and I are leaving for London tomorrow. We'll start anew, away from the gossip. I can't thank you enough for finding the truth, even if it hurt." Dr. Grayson nodded, his boyish charm tempered by gratitude. "You saved us, in a way. Clara and I will make something good of this." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "You will, my dears. Love is a strong thread, stronger than scandal. Take care of each other." The train pulled into the station, its steam curling into the air. Florence hugged her aunt tightly, tears in her eyes. "Aunt Jane, you've changed Netherby forever. Will you write to me?" "Of course, Florence," Miss Marple said, patting her niece's cheek. "And you must write to me with all the village news. I shall be most interested." As she boarded the train, Miss Marple took a final look at Netherby-on-Stream. The stream glimmered in the distance, its secrets now laid bare. The ghostly flame, a fleeting signal of deceit, had burned out, leaving only the truth in its wake. She settled into her seat, her knitting bag at her side, and opened Miss Blake's letter. It was a simple note, signed by the villagers, thanking her for her wisdom and care. Miss Marple smiled, tucking the letter away. "People," she murmured to herself, "are so very human. They stumble, but they also mend. And that is the last thread of any mystery." As the train pulled away, carrying her toward St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to home. Netherby-on-Stream would carry on, its wounds healing, its stories enduring. And she, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, would be ready for the next pattern to unravel, wherever it might be found. Chapter 15. The journey home. The train to St. Mary Mead rattled gently through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the quiet hum of Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat by the window, her lavender coat folded neatly. Beside her, her knitting bag resting on the seat. The lace shawl she had begun in Netherby-on-Stream was nearly complete, its intricate pattern a mirror of the mystery she had unraveled. Outside, the rolling hills of the Cotswolds faded into the distance, their soft greens and golds blurring as the train carried her away from the village and its secrets. Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes, framed by her spectacles, gazed at the passing landscape, but her mind lingered on Netherby-on-Stream, the ghostly flame by the village stream, the scorched stone, the charred letter fragment, the dented cigarette casole had played their parts in revealing Sir Henry Ashford's crime. Yet it was the human threads, pride, shame, love, and greed that had woven the true story, one of passion and betrayal, of secrets guarded and truths exposed. In her bag, tucked beside her knitting, was the letter from Miss Dorothy Blake, signed by the villagers of Netherby. She had read it again before boarding, its simple words of gratitude warming her heart. "You've given us back our village," it said, and Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had helped them mend. Even if the scars of Tom Rudd's murder would linger, she thought of Clara Ashford and Dr. Philip Grayson, now bound for London, their young love a fragile but hopeful thread in the village's tapestry. She thought of the Reverend and Mrs. Carver, facing their broken trust with tentative steps toward reconciliation. Miss Blake, with her watchful eyes, would keep the village's pulse, and Mr. Finch, chastened by his carelessness, would guard his chemicals more closely. Even Florence, her nervous chatter tempered by the weight of what she had witnessed. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she worked on the shawl. each stitch a small act of creation. She reflected on the nature of villages, so like the people who inhabited them, full of contradictions, capable of great kindness and great folly. Netherby-on-Stream had been no different from St. Mary Mead, or any other place where human hearts beat. The ghostly flame, she mused, had been more than a lure for Tom Rudd. It had been a beacon, illuminating the hidden corners of the village's soul. As the train neared St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Whodunit cottage, her garden, her neighbors, with their own small dramas. She knew there would be new mysteries waiting, new patterns to unravel, for human nature was as constant as the seasons. The memory of Netherby would stay with her, a reminder that even the darkest secrets could be brought to light with patience and care. The train slowed, and the familiar spire of St. Mary Mead's church came into view. Miss Marple packed her knitting, her shawl now finished, its edges perfect. She rose, smoothing her coat, and stepped onto the platform, where the air was sweet with the scent of late summer flowers. A neighbor, Mrs. Price, waved from the station gate, her gossip already bubbling forth. "Miss Marple, you're back," Mrs. Price called. "You must tell me about your trip. Florence wrote to say there was quite a to-do in Netherby." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "A to-do, indeed, Mrs. Price, but it's settled now, and I'm glad to be home. Shall we have tea tomorrow? I'm sure you've stories of your own to share." As she walked toward her cottage, Miss Marple felt the familiar comfort of St. Mary Mead settle around her. The mystery of the ghostly flame was behind her, its threads neatly tied. Yet she knew, with a quiet certainty, that other mysteries would call, other villages would whisper their secrets, and she, with her sharp eyes and gentle wisdom, would be ready to listen. "People," she murmured to herself, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side, "are so very much themselves, and that, after all, is the greatest mystery of all."